Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first official episode of reasonpunditTV, or whatever this is going to be called. I know this is looking very low budget right now because, honestly, it is. um, just a college student with basically no money. But I do have a camera and a tripod that are in two different locations right now. And I might try to do that and get them together to make this look a little more professional, but that'll mean a lot more work, a lot more editing work. We'll see. Yeah. And let me begin with a few more disclaimers before we get into the meat and potatoes of this video. This is going to be pretty informal. I think that's part of the problem with our media today, and part of the reason why I have the blog in the first place is because we all get talked down to very often. That, they're another class of people, and they treat us very pretentiously and act like we don't have the intellect or the ability to understand the things that they understand, and thus we have to be told what is true and what is not. I'm not going to do that here. I think that if you spend enough time and energy into doing the intellectual work to coming to the same conclusions as I do, or at least trying to come to those same conclusions, you've done your job, and you should understand the truth. All you have to do is be honest with yourself and what you believe. Be honest with your ideology. You need to be courageous enough to buck the establishment and say, no, I'm not going to listen to you anymore. I can make up my own mind. And you have to have the devotion to spreading that along to other people too. The buck does not stop with you. It needs to keep going. It needs to spread. Secondly, I'm not very mindful of my language usage. I can get pretty profane at times. I'm not trying to be a jerk, but if you don't like it, either deal with it or don't watch it. Freedom of speech, baby. And finally, I won't be always talking about what the mainstream media is talking about in their news du jour. This is the whole reason why I have this show and this blog in the first place. Unfortunately, we cannot trust our media anymore. Objective journalism, in terms of Walter Lippmann's idea, is long dead, and the supposed Lippmannites of our media today like to have you think that that's what they're trying to do, but it's really not, on both sides. It happens all the time with the network news channels, and it happens in the biggest newspapers, and even the smallest newspapers. It happens on the cable news channels, both on the left, like MSNBC, and on the right, like Fox News. I am totally forthcoming with my biases. I can tell you right now that I'm somewhere along the lines of a Tea Party libertarian conservative. If you can even decipher what exactly that means. I don't even know if I know what that means. I don't try to be fair and balanced like other news groups would like you to think that they are, because when they say that, they're trying to tell you that we don't have a bias one way or the other, that we're straight down the middle, and you can trust us completely on that, on our ideology. You can trust that we both give the perspective of the left and the perspective of the right. I'm not doing that here. I will be presenting facts to you honestly, and I will be expressing my bias honestly, and you'll be able to tell that without doing any deciphering or questioning whether or not what I'm saying is true or false. You might agree with me completely, or you might want to actually rip the guts out of my stomach, and that's okay. As George Washington said, we need to meet on the battlefield of ideas. I love a good debate, as long as everyone is honest about the facts and their own personal biases. I think that doesn't happen enough in this country, where we can, debate issues and have a disagreement of opinion, but leave that to the side on the battlefield of ideas, and actually be nice to one another, even if we disagree completely. It can happen. It does happen. I have plenty of friends that way that I completely disagree with, and family members for that matter too, and I still love them to death, but we don't agree on jack crap. So that's another thing that I'm trying to facilitate with these videos and with my blog. It's an open conversation, being honest with the facts, and being open about our own personal ideologies. Anyway, that's kind of a winded precursor of what's going to happen with these videos. So let's move on to my topic of the day, which is my review of Dinesh D'Souza's documentary 2016 Obama's America. Now, the documentary has received a lot of hype, a lot of support, and a lot of criticism because Dinesh D'Souza is a fairly polarizing figure, but also an intriguing figure. D'Souza was a young Indian immigrant who moved here in his later teen years and went to college at Dartmouth. And D'Souza was going to Dartmouth at the same time that Barack Obama was attending Harvard. And that's where the film begins, is at this dichotomy between the two men. They've had very similar upbringings, living most of their childhoods outside of the United States. And then they both came back to America and went to Ivy League schools at the same time. Also talked about then they graduated in the same class. They were married the same year. So undoubtedly they must have had very similar, opportunities and somewhat similar experiences. So how did they come out to be two completely different men? One who is very conservative, and he admits that, and one is not so much. Once you look at it from that angle, it really gets you to start to think about what is the experience of Barack Obama. Because, before I started really getting into, reading about him and knowing the facts, I'm not sure if I really knew him either. It's not that he's shrouded in mystery or that, there are lots of conspiracies that you can weed out and that kind of thing, but it's rather that nobody just really asked. It's something that seems to be asked, of every other person that, tries to get elected to high office. For whatever reason, we just never thought that asking about Barack Obama's past was an important thing. Should have been, because as the documentary tries to argue, and what I believe as well, is that his upbringing and who he looks up to really shapes what he believes about the world. The difference with D'Souza is that he completely rejected India's culture at the time and the caste system, and he didn't want to be a part of that. He knew, he said in the movie that had I stayed in India, I probably would have lived my whole life within a 1 square mile radius of where I lived. He would have been stuck in a little insulated bubble, and he didn't want to do that. And on the contrary, Barack Obama was a part of a broken family. A father who had multiple wives and beat those multiple wives, and living with his mother and moving all over the world and having people surrounding him, his parents and his mentors, his relatives, who were all radically left at best and full-fledged communist at worst. I mean, this undoubtedly shapes one's view of the world, be it communist or Nazi or whatever. If you grew up around that, you're going to believe at least some of it. Obama's own memoir is called Dreams from My Father. It gets misconstrued a lot of the time as Dreams of My Father, but it's Dreams from My Father, which means that Obama is saying in his writing that he's carrying on the ghost of his father and his dreams and his beliefs. And what were those dreams? Barack Obama Sr. was an anti-colonialist. He believed that reparations were needed from the British and the Dutch and other countries who colonized the third world nations in Africa because they did so many terrible things to its people, pillaging its land and its resources. And, on the surface, that's a very legitimate thing to say. By no means was colonization and imperialism a happy thing. A good thing. There was a lot of bad things that came from that. Whether or not that white occupation of those countries actually, and oddly helped them in the long run is another thing, which Obama's half-brother, George Obama, talks about a little bit in the documentary, which is an interesting argument, but that's not the point. The point is, at least I think, is that we've moved far beyond this idea of colonialism just altogether. I mean, you can argue a little bit, and even I do sometimes, where there's a little bit of that left over in this idea of building democracies in the Middle East and that kind of thing. But for the most part, we're beyond that. We don't, from like a resource standpoint, we don't need to do that anymore. The British aren't gunning to invade Kenya tomorrow. It's not something that's necessary anymore, and it's something that people have learned through history classes and just culture in general. That we've done terrible things to people of African heritage throughout history. But that was the past. Now they're afforded the opportunity to do what they wish, to rebuild their nation and to prosper. Unfortunately, in their case, they can't overcome the forces of terror, corrupt politicians that are ruining their chances for that. And whether or not that's something we should help them out with is, again, another conversation for another day. The point that D'Souza is trying to make with all this is that this anti-colonial ideology that comes from Obama's father has carried on with Barack Jr. and is being used to make his decisions in the Oval Office. And really, if you think hard enough and long enough about it, and you've seen the documentary or you've read up on it, it makes a lot of sense, and it answers a lot of questions, and even the small things like returning the bust of Winston Churchill back to Britain. It's one of the first things that he ever did when he was in the Oval Office. And recently there was a little bit of controversy about that because it was asked about again. And supposedly it wasn't true, except, no, it did happen. It turns out that there's 2 copies of that bust. And the original went back to Britain, and the copy isn't in the Oval Office, but it's in the possession of the White House curator, I believe. It explains why they did that. Winston Churchill wasn't just the Prime Minister of Britain during World War II and, our biggest ally at that time and whatnot. That's what he gets remembered for, but what gets forgotten is that before World War II, and that's how Winston came to power, he was the head of the colonial offices of British Parliament, meaning that during Barack Obama Sr.'s time and even Oyango Obama, Barack's grandfather, during his time, Winston Churchill was the enemy. He was leading the charge against their people, from their point of view. To me, that explains that decision to send that bust back. It's Obama saying, you did horrible things to my father and to my people, and that's wrong. I don't want that staring me in the face every day, because even still today, Britain is our greatest ally. The controversy at the time when the bust was sent back was just asking, why would you do that? You're hurting our relation, even if it's just something so simple as returning a bust. And the reason that the bust has significance in the first place is because Gordon Brown gave it to George W. Bush a few days after 9/11, and he said, take this as a token of our friendship and our alliance. We'll do anything that we can to help you in this time, and keep it as long as you need our help. And by returning it, that's diplomatically, that's Obama saying, we don't need you anymore. And that's not right. Throughout his first term, Obama has been hard set on this idea that everybody needs to be on equal footing. He demonizes the rich all the time, which people say that he doesn't. I could go on and talk for an hour or more about, his tax policy and his comment of, you didn't build that, and, all that stuff. On a foreign policy front, he's adamant on making sure that nuclear stockpiles across the globe are down to 0. Despite the fact that our enemies, wouldn't even think of doing that. They're not going to agree to that. But Obama wants to do it regardless of whether or not our enemies do. The whole ideology is based on the reality that in the short term, these third world nations are not going to be able to raise their standard of living up to ours in the first world. So the solution is to take our standing in the first world and bring it down to a second world level. Through redistribution of wealth and resources, and give those resources to third world countries, and bring their standard of living up to ours. So everybody is, quote unquote, a second world country. And, this isn't conspiracy theory. That's the ideology. And if you read Obama's words in his memoir, and you learn about his past and what his, what his father stood for and who he looks up to, it's right there. All you got to do is read it and learn it, and it's absolutely evident that is what it is. And as we've seen in Obama's first term, he'll do whatever he wants to get whatever he wants. It's just limited by his own imagination. He's completely disregarded the constitutional framework that makes up this country, especially the process that we do to make law. He's bypassed that many times and has abused his power many times. He has done this most recently when he just decided to blow off Congress and, with the stroke of his pen, just decree that nearly 1 million illegal immigrants can, if they fill out the proper paperwork, can gain legal status, despite the fact that they've broken the law. No, don't make the process easier for people to come in the country illegally. Don't actually try to, even if that's what you want to do, just grant amnesty. Don't try to go through the proper process in Congress. Just sign an executive order, which is absolutely illegal. The problem is there's nobody in Congress that has the balls to actually step up and do anything about it, but, another topic for another video, which you will learn that I will say a lot, because a lot of these things are intertwined. Anyway, I feel like, no matter what your political persuasion is, you can find something worthwhile out of this documentary. And the tagline of the whole documentary is, love him, hate him, you don't know him. And for the most part, unless you've really done your research beforehand, it's true. You don't know who the man is, and this exposes it pretty matter-of-factly. As I mentioned on Twitter, I managed to convince my lifelong Democrat grandparents to come with me to see the documentary, and they were very content with the tone of the film. They felt like they learned a lot, and I think it might be changing their minds a little bit. If I were to score it, I'd probably give it about an 8.5 out of 10. There are more topics that I wish D'Souza would have dived further into, especially Obama's mentor, Frank Marshall Davis, who Obama just calls Frank in his memoir, partially because Frank is a very, very, very interesting, weird, controversial figure. Besides the fact that he was an actual communist, a registered communist, during the Red Scare, he was also a pedophile and just a very bizarre and, I would say, disgusting man. He really didn't touch on that, which I was surprised, because I think that's a very important piece of the puzzle there. To be mentored by a man like that, if it doesn't influence your worldview, it at least changes you as a person. And, there were just a few little qualms like that of content that I wish he would have covered, but, you only have so much time to keep somebody's attention. But otherwise, it was a very good film. If you've seen the movie, or, you'd rather read about it, there are four books that I'd recommend on the topic. Of course, first is Obama's memoir, Dreams from My Father. And then there are 2 books that D'Souza has written, and they kind of act as the background for this documentary, which are The Roots of Obama's Rage and Obama's America. And then finally, Paul Kangor's book, The Communist, which goes into Frank Marshall Davis's life. He's written other biographies of political figures as well, I believe, of Ronald Reagan, maybe Churchill, might have been Thatcher. But all 4 of those books are very good reads if you want to read them before the election. So if you've seen the movie, let me know what you think in the comments down below, or you could tweet at me, mention me on Twitter at SchulerJ. Did you love it? Did you hate it? And why? Be sure to rate this video with thumbs up, favorite it if you really liked it, and click up there and subscribe. That'll really help. Spread the word. Post it on Facebook. Whatever you need to do. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you next time.